Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. I think everyone could testify to how imperceptibly incremental our spiritual growth can feel in some areas of our lives. If you're like me, you've often felt a disconnect between the theology that you believe and the reactions that leak out of you in everyday life. Even though you know something is true in your head, it doesn't seem to be shaping your heart or steering your hands. In this conversation with a family friend, Chip, he shares a recent story of dysregulation that puts words to all of these tensions so beautifully. We talk about what initiated a deep inner change in his life 5 years ago after decades of following Jesus and years in full-time ministry. And he models how true spiritual growth and emotional maturity often begin with getting to know your story and learning to tell it more truly. Listen in. Well, welcome to Faith and Feelings, Chip. I'm so glad you're here.
It's great to be here, Taylor.
Well, we are in a series right now called Why on Earth Did I Do or Say That? And in this series, I'm inviting different guests to share and process a story of when their emotional response to a situation was a 7 or 8 on a scale when it was warranted a 2 or 3. We all have so many moments like this, but we don't often pause and reflect on what's underneath these responses or connect the dots between these everyday reactions and deeper themes in our stories. When I was thinking about the people that I'd love to have on, I thought about you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. You live in Chiang Mai, Thailand, near my family. That's where you're recording from today. And I always look forward to seeing you and your family when I'm home for Christmas. I have so many memories of sitting around our table and sharing stories. And you have such an amazing ability to be so full of humor and yet so full of compassion and reflection at the same time. So, Chip, to get started, would you mind sharing a story of when you were emotionally dysregulated?
Yeah. That was very kind. That was very kind of you to say those things. It's funny. I was thinking about this question as we were preparing, and I was having a hard time thinking of stories. And then I had just started paying a little bit of attention and realized that I was emotionally dysregulated quite a lot, actually. And so one recent experience, I had our family is needing to update some financial software. It's like an app or something that we can use to to get our stuff together. And a few weeks ago, I had begun to explore one particular app, and I tried it a couple of times. I wanted to do this one thing. It was giving me a little bit of a hard time, and I just sort of thought, I don't like this. I'm going to put it away. Maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe I won't. And then, so then goes a couple of weeks later, and I'm sitting on the couch, and my wife Mel comes down, and I don't remember what I was doing. I'm sure that it wasn't anything like super important. I was probably doing the Wordle or something like that. And she says, hey, let's take a look at that app. And I was like, I've already looked at it. It's not going to work for us. It's really not able to do the stuff that we needed to do. And she's like, well, I was reading up on it, and I actually think it'll be a good app for us. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I already looked at it. It's not going to work. She asked a few more questions. Frankly, now that I'm thinking back, very reasonable questions, like, what about it didn't work? And I'll tell you, every time she asked another question, I found myself getting more and more frustrated. And so finally, I was really pretty snippy with her, and I could feel it I could feel myself getting angry, and I thought, this is silly. Like, I shouldn't be. I was even able to understand that the feelings that I were having were not appropriate, but it was like I couldn't pull out. I was so frustrated, and so I think I kind of shut her down. And I'll tell you, like, it took me hours probably to recover from that.
Hmm.
She finally backed off, and then it took me hours, and the whole time during those hours, I knew that I had been completely unreasonable, um,
Huh.
and not gracious at all, like not kind, not anything. And she was trying to help. Um, it took me a few hours before I finally came back to her, and I was like, I don't really know what was going on there, but I'm sorry. But I wanted to apologize sooner, but I just couldn't. I was so
Yeah.
angry, and I
Hmm.
was I was frustrated that I was so angry. It was really overwhelming. And I think the thing about these kind of triggers or experiences that set us off, it's not an isolation. Earlier that morning, I had another experience with my kids, which I just had this wonderful time with the Lord, and I got like a look from one of my kids, and I had just spent this beautiful time with Jesus. And then my daughter looks at me with just this. I mean, she said it was early morning. She looked, and I was like,
Yeah.
rah, I suddenly became like a monster. It was like 8 minutes ago, I
Yeah.
was, in this holy place. Um, and so I was already sort of set off by that. And then, some time had gone by, and here poor Melanie comes in and is like, hey, let's take a look at this thing that might help our family do things better.
Hmm.
And I just turned into this monster.
Huh. Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. What you put words to a couple minutes ago was such a good way of describing dysregulation. You felt yourself getting angry, but you couldn't pull out.
Yeah.
Like you're just sucked into the spiral.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about that moment, what were some of the emotions that you were feeling?
Oh, I was angry.
Hmm.
I was angry. I was feeling disrespected.
Yeah.
I was feeling so frustrated that I was so angry. Like I found
Mm.
myself almost trying to speak to myself, like, what is going on with you? And I was like, shut up, you. And
Huh.
I was getting angry about being angry. And I was feeling ashamed. Here I was, like, really being rude to my wife, and I knew it was happening, and I wouldn't stop. I kept kind of my really bad attitude with her. Um, yeah, I felt frustrated and angry and ashamed.
How long do you think you'd been feeling that way? A day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years?
That day that was probably when my sweet daughter, just kind of rolled her eyes or whatever. It's probably, but it's not an unfamiliar feeling. Like I wish it was, but yeah, that day, it's so funny because I started out with this lovely time with Jesus, and
Yeah.
it took like 0 to 60 in 8 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned feeling angry about feeling angry.
Mm.
Are there any other emotions that you felt about the anger that you were feeling in the moment?
I was embarrassed.
Hmm.
I was embarrassed. I definitely felt shame. Um, I guess at a certain level, I knew that my behavior was probably causing at least some. I mean, Melanie wasn't, I didn't upset her too much, but I was aware that I was causing her some discomfort. And I didn't want to be, but I didn't feel like I could, like I didn't have the capacity to slow down. So I was feeling sad about that, and ashamed about that. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I would say those are the main emotions.
Yeah. In the hours that you were processing after that conversation, were you able to pinpoint why you were feeling that way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the secret sauce. Like, how do you do that? Like, I think I tried. Um,
Yeah.
I definitely was curious, and I've learned that skill to be curious about my emotions. That's not something that came naturally to me. Um, but so I did explore that, and I'm aware of some of my early childhood uh, experiences that were pretty formational, I guess, in my upbringing. Um, and I can remember a time when I felt particularly. powerless or ashamed.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, as I'm seeing a counselor and trying to work through what does it look like to be a healthy person, I'm aware that those things are probably connected. Um,
Hmm.
but those questions, like why am I feeling this way? I think they're super important, but they're not super easy to answer.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a significant amount for me. There's a significant amount of sensing like I shouldn't feel like this. Like I'm 50 years old. I've been a believer. I've been walking with Jesus for all these years. I'm a leader in a sense. Like there's a lot of um, like you sort of turn on yourself and say, what kind of person behaves that way? It was such a
Hmm.
simple thing.
Hmm.
Um, I hear a lot of people talk about their daughters rolling their eyes. Like that's not a unique experience that I
Hmm.
have. But somehow I'm like, completely undone. It's like, man, what in the world?
Hmm. Yeah. That's so good that I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's so relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel awful about feeling that way. Like I should
Mm.
think, well, of course I'm not anybody, but I guess it's probably rooted in pride and pain. I don't know, probably both.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm. When you think back to that conversation that you had with Mel, what were some of the things that were happening in your body?
Yeah, I do tend to kind of clench my jaw.
Hmm.
Part of that is maybe an active attempt to keep from saying something I'll regret, but some of it is just like I have this need to sort of I don't know, flex or I don't know what, like and just kind of expend some energy. I definitely felt hot, like this kind of heat
Yeah.
come over me, and I could almost hear my heart beating in my ears. Um, so there was a number of things. I think my heart kind of gets into my throat.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. What's it like for you now telling this story? What do you feel in your body now?
I feel my heart picking up a little bit. I do feel that kind of it's getting in my throat a little. It's not.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say some of those similar feelings are come back. I don't feel like I have to grit my teeth or clench my fists or anything, but I can remember those feelings when we were having that conversation for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned walking away and having this feeling of confusion, maybe of like, okay, that just happened. Why did I just react that way? So what
Yes.
were what were some of the thoughts rolling around in your mind, either during that conversation or after?
Yeah, I think during the conversation there was a significant part of me that was like, why do you keep asking me this question? And um, as I walked away, I mean, it wasn't hard for me to think of the answer to that question. It was because we need some help with this particular issue. Um, uh, but so that was like more of the reasonable. Hey, what are the facts here? But man, the script that I was playing in my head was, what kind of a husband are you? What kind of a father are you? How can you call yourself a leader or a Christian?
Mm.
Think about how small this thing is, and think about how out of control you are. As I reflected, Taylor, on the hours, probably hours, it took me to calm down. Now, I wasn't entirely focused on that the whole time, but I couldn't bring myself to turn and approach Melanie and say, finally when I did, my approach was like, I don't know what just happened there, but I was out of control. Like, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
But I was still not ready to talk about, the thing. It's like, I still need some space.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was just a track of just belittling, myself. Like you aren't, you can't even have a reasonable conversation with your wife.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm sure if somebody else heard that stuff, it would have been shocking.
Hmm.
Um, Pretty awful things I was saying to myself.
So some self-contempt.
Oh yeah, more than some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of self-contempt.
Yes.
Hmm. Do you know why it took you that long to go back to Mel? Can you pinpoint what was behind the like I can't like I physically can't go back?
Yeah. Ooh, I think more than anything, it was the sense that I was behaving so poorly. And this is a person that I love so much. And yet the way that I was behaving toward her was just awful. And I was just so I wasn't horrified because it's not that unusual. Like it's not a I mean, I experienced those kinds of feelings throughout a week multiple times. This particular time, I think, yeah, I think it has something to do with that deep sense of shame. Um, and I don't know. My counselor, I'm sure, would say it reminds me of that feeling that I had when I was a little kid. Kind of
Mm,
not helpful at a time when I was trying to be, and feeling super like you want to be doing something that's helpful, and what you're doing is actually causing the opposite. So
hmm.
it yeah, and I think in a sense that's really what was happening. I'm not sure I wanted to be helpful. Melanie wanted to be helpful, and I was sort of rejecting her help.
What do you think you wanted most in that moment?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, in that moment, for some reason, I was feeling threatened. So like now, I think, well, I wanted to have a good app so that we could do this financial stuff, but not then. Like then
Yeah.
I wanted to get away.
Hmm.
Like I wanted to
Hmm.
to just walk away. But I will tell you, I was so angry that I wouldn't do it. Like I found myself saying, I'm not walking away. It's like, well, why not? I don't know. Like inside, I'm having this crazy argument with myself. And maybe part of that was, well, I'm not going to let this control me that much. But it was already controlling me.
Hmm.
So probably I wanted to get away, or I wanted to, I don't know, I convinced her that I was right about something. I don't even know what it would have been. Um, I'll tell you, and I wanted to get away. I wanted to eat a bag of Oreos, like a whole bag. Just want to grab a
Yeah.
bag and just start going.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, not that moment, but like an hour later, it's like I know it'll help. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh gosh,
Mm.
I don't. It's sometimes so hard to know what I want. Um, and in that moment, I think I wanted to get away, but I also felt like can't walk away. This is nothing that should be bothering you so much. But it was.
Mm.
It was really. It had me, man.
So when you think about this moment, I'm hearing so many paradoxes, which I think is so common in dysregulating moments. So it's like
Mm,
this sense of powerlessness and feeling threatened, and the sense of wanting to run away and wanting to stay. All of these conflicting, the anger and the shame. Can you remember the earliest time that you felt that way?
yeah. I mean, I think as a kid, I mentioned it before. Like as a kid, I was the only boy. I have five sisters. We have a big family.
Wow.
Um, and my sisters would probably say that I had it pretty easy, because I was the only boy or whatever. But anytime there was like manual labor to be done outside, we always did it together. But when things
Mm-hmm.
broke, which they often did, I mean, lawnmowers or plumbing, or I mean, stuff was always breaking. So then I would be my dad's assistant. And yeah, I don't know, like a lot of boys, I really looked up to my dad. Like he was my hero. He still is. And I would go to help him, and I can remember a number of times. when he would have some task for me and I just couldn't do it. Or, one significant memory was to go get him some tool he had asked me to get from the toolbox. And his toolbox was a disaster area. I mean, it was 100 drawers, and each drawer had everything in the world in it. And whatever the thing is that he asked me to get, I didn't know what it was, but it was my job to get it. And I came back, and I had a 1 in a million chance of getting the right tool. And yeah, I didn't get the right one, and he was really frustrated. And I was there, so I received his frustration. Um, and I can remember wanting desperately to be helpful. Like, oh, I want to be the guy. I go in, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I needed. Hey, thanks so much. That's going to be the thing that helps this
Yeah.
lawnmower work now. And it was definitely not the reception I got. Um, yeah, I think that would be the time when I felt so worthless. Like, you can't even pick the thing. How hard is that? Um, and I'm only learning now at 50, however many 40 something years later, or 30 something years later, that the stuff that I'm experiencing on the couch with my wife might be related to that feeling that I guess
Mm-hmm.
I never healed from. Um, yeah, it's hard to believe that those experiences still bear fruit all these years later.
The desire that you named right there stands out so much to me. I just want to be helpful. What other emotions come up for you as you think back about that memory?
Well, Taylor, I'll tell you, like, this might be one of the first times that I've told that without falling apart. Um,
Mm,
like, it's really amazing. I was probably 8, so that's like 42 years ago. And I've tried to tell that story to people that I love or people that have asked, and I usually I can't get the words out. I'm just so overwhelmed with. Uh, I guess it's shame or it's sorrow. I think it's hard
mm,
um, because I love my dad so much. So there is probably a sense of, like, it's hard for me to say that he hurt me, because I think that would destroy him, because I know he doesn't want to hurt me. Uh, but yeah, I would say that it can be extremely unsettling. Um,
yeah.
which, there's another paradox, I'm sure. Like, it seems like the hardest thing in the world to do is to go back and look at that scene in my mind, because I just want to forget it. But maybe that's the only way to heal. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, yeah. So it's usually a pretty heavy flood of emotion when I think about that experience. I mean, it still is. I'm just
Yeah.
holding it together.
What do you wish you could go back and tell yourself in that moment?
Mm.
If you just envision 8-year-old Chip handing the tool to your dad.
Yeah, I have to say, it's still hard for me to have an awful lot of compassion for that kid, and I know that's probably part of my journey. Um, you know, it's not reasonable to, like, I know the reason that I couldn't find the thing was because my dad never told me what it was. Like, I don't
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
automatically know that.
right.
And the toolbox was a disaster. Like, any reasonable person, like, I've heard this from others speaking to me, so I would want to be able to say things that I've heard people say to me, but they don't originate from me, because I still feel like so, I guess, yeah, almost angry at my younger self for not getting it right. But that's silly. Like, I couldn't possibly find that. He couldn't have found it, maybe.
Hmm.
So I guess I would want to say, listen, yeah, he didn't tell you what it was. You can't know something that you didn't know. Um, yeah, but I have to say, that's a hard one for me to. I'm sure that's truth, though. That's just truth. But it feels, yeah, it feels awful.
Hmm. I'm just envisioning that moment with you and your dad, and I'm just envisioning Jesus standing there beside you.
Mm,
What do you think might be the expression on his face? Like, what do you think he would have wanted you to know in that moment?
yeah, yeah. I'm sure he would have been heartbroken that I was so that I was yeah that I was being treated that way. That I was feeling so like 'cause I remember being so nervous. Like when I went to the toolbox, I knew that I didn't have the right tool. Like there's just no way. Like go get the thing. And so I'm like, okay, like I'll walk there, I'll grab something. I hope it's it, but there's no way it is. So I'm shaking or whatever. I'm so afraid that I've got the wrong thing. And my dad had a temper. So I was probably afraid of that. I was afraid of letting him down. And I know there was so much fear and shame and yeah, I could imagine Jesus just yeah feeling really sorry that I was having so much trouble
Mm,
in that moment. And I know he would want me to know that he cared about that. Um,
mm,
yeah,
mm. That's really beautiful. As a final question to wrap up our conversation, I'm curious to know what you've been learning recently about staying emotionally grounded in hard spaces.
yeah. In probably these last 5 years, that's when I started uncovering some of my old wounds and being being able to maybe interrogate some of my triggers. Um, and I think certainly being curious,
Yeah.
uh, paying attention, paying attention to things that are going on. I have a number of friends that I meet with, and we meet on a regular basis, and it's basically a lot like what we're doing here. We just listen to each other, and we have this deal where nobody gives advice, nobody says um, what we should do about anything. We kind of are committed to entrusting one another to the Lord's care. So, like, if my friend is sharing, I'm not going, "Oh, here's what I think you should do."
Yeah.
I'm just, I'm just holding that and knowing that God cares about that situation way more than I do, and He will meet them in that space. Um, I think I could say confidently that's been the most transformative experience that I've ever had. Um, and I feel so deeply thankful that because I mean, Taylor, we believe that Jesus cares. Like as you asked that question, I'm thinking back as a kid. Jesus would have been there. Like that's
Yeah.
truth.
Right.
But I can't see him, and I don't.
Mm,
But I can see my friend's eyes looking at me as I'm struggling. And there's something that happens, something profound that happens as my brother or my sister holds my story. Um, that changes my own experience of my own story. Uh, and I think I would have read that probably in books and stuff, but until I sat there with these friends to experience it, I don't think I would have really understood that. Um, yeah, those would be some of the things. Your book was, I mean, I loved your book, and your podcast is incredible. These are all things that have been incredibly helpful for me, and yeah, I'm sure for many others.
hmm. I love what you said there about it's like the move from intellectual concepts to embodied experience.
Yeah.
And that's where transformation happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm learning the power of the community, the power of the other, and the way that we kind of tell our stories in community, the way that we,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that the fact that I can say that thing about my dad and I when I was a kid, it used to completely upend me. Like I got ugly crying about that the one time I tried to tell that story, or the first time. And the fact that I can tell that now, I know that is because I have seen love in brothers and sisters' eyes as I've told that. So in some ways, there's part of me that's healed. I'm still on that journey of healing and wholeness. But I can say the Lord has used the presence of people. I could see Jesus in their eyes, and I can sense His love through their love. Yeah.
Mm. I just want to thank you for sharing what you have today. I'm really grateful for the stories that you've shared.
Yeah, I appreciate even, the idea of triggers and exploring them. It's something you talked about the difference between intellectual and deeper. Like like I might, I listen to your podcast about triggers. I've read about triggers, but when I dig into them is when I start to change.
Yeah.
And so I start realizing, man, they're everywhere. I'm constantly getting bumped.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too.
So
Me too.
I'm in the remedial course. I need a lot of triggers, I guess.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's so relatable. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Chip.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you.
Wasn't that such a beautiful conversation? Chip shared so much depth and wisdom that invites us into deeper reflection as we move from one year into the next. The question that I'm considering as we move into 2025 is this year, how can I open up deeper and deeper layers of myself to transformation, to grace? We so often want to hide the parts of ourselves that we don't like. But Chip taught me that the parts of us that we are most ashamed of are the parts of us that God most wants to love. And when we bring these parts of ourselves into safe community, we experience the embodiment of God's love in a way that changes us in the deepest kind of way. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.